A father sold his own 2 daughters to a cueil haché in exchange for monnaie, but something else was written in their fat. Gold spilled across the fragile fields as the sun sank low over the prairie. Under its breath, the wind bar the world as it combed the grass and long lengths. The boards were worn and splintered as Toisiste stood be the doorway of a leaning shack. At dusk, the chaîne sagged like, si vous avez aimé cette histoire du Far West, n'oubliez pas de vous abonner à la chaîne Conte du Far West pour découvrir d'autres récits puissants, remplis de courage, de justice et de destin. Activez la cloche pour ne manquer aucune nouvelle aventure et rejoignez-nous sous les grands cieux du Far West. Ah, elderly man. Despite being 19 years old, they had experienced several more winters due to hardship. The fabrique of Julia's dress was thin at the elbows as she leaned against the frame with her arm folded tightly across her chest. She watched the horizon like it might offer en souhait. Beside her, Elisa clutched a satchel to her chest, a few mementos bundled inside, a cracked mihor, a scrap of their mother's shawl, a notebook full of small privat poems no one had ever read. Behind them, the ooze sagged seal and still. No laughter lived there anymore, only dust and ghost. Their mother's grave sa out back, marked by a river stone and a ring of field flowers that Julia attended every Sunday with aching knees. Their father shuffled inside, the bottle slapping heavy against his palm. Ossie had been a man to admire, strong and odd psalm, voice like a hymn rising over morning dew, beat time and sorrow had gnawed the tenderness from him. The whiskey deed the hest. The rattle of wagon wheels kept the hush. Dust haws o'er the road like smoke from a dying fear. Julia's heart hardened in her chest. She knew who came. Elisa edged closer her fenge brushing Julia's, a sealed tether. They had been born together in the same red dawn, 2 breaths apart, and it seemed they would see their endings side by side as well. The wagon stopped a few pas from the Porsche. Alors Wexley heaved himself down, boots thudding like falling stone. He was a mountain of a man, belly stretching his vest, jowls quivering with each step. His hat was fine, his coat trimmed with gold thread, but there was nothing noble in the man himself. His eyes sleed over the girls like they were cattle at market. Their father stumbled out, wiping his mouth with the back of his arm, fast slack with sham he was too proud to name. He did not look at them, could not. No words were spoken, only a handshake, a ad brutal clasp between men who had lost their way long ago. Holland's mouth twisted into something meant to be a smile. Come along, girls, time we go you settled. Eliza's breath hitched, but Julia squeezed her arm. Not here, not now. Their grief would be privat. Their dignity would be the last thing no one could steal. They climbed into the wagon, skirt scraping wood worn smooth by other sorrows. No one said goodbye. The horse snorted and stamped, and the wagon lurched forward. Dust swallowed them whole as they left the only arm they had ever known. Julia kept her eyes ahead, chien high, though every jolt of the wagon felt like a hammer to her heeb. She would not look back. She would not give their father that. Elisa softer turned os. Her arm pressed against her heart like she could hold the place inside her forever. She watched the shack grow smale and smale until it was nothing more than a splinte on the edge of the world. The road wound west, hoot deep from years of lonely tavle. The sky bled into twilight pink and orange breeze across the heavens. Past, the girls did not speak. Words felt too heavy to lift. The law changed as they traveled, the wide openness closing in. Barbed wire fence stitched across the fields. Smoke from distant ooze stained the sky black. They crossed a rive at nightfall, the waters murky and restless, and Arlon lit a lanterne that swung and groaned with each bump of the road. His face, cast in the flickering light, looked like a mask carved from greed and need. He talked as they hawed about his ranch, about the fiend clothes they would wear, the partie they would attend. His words were syrupy, but a whole clung underneath. Julia listened in silence, building walls inside her heart. Each promise he made, she mocked as Ali. She had learned early not to trust men who smiled without kindness in their eyes. Elisa shivered beside her, pulling her shawl tighter, and Julia slipped an arm around her shoulder, shielding her from the chill that wasn't just the wind. As the night deepened, Harlon's voice slurred. He had a bottle tucked beneath the seat, and he drank with the ease of a man who needed forgetting more than pleasure. The star overhead wheeled slowly across the black Cowboy, seal witnesses to the tide made in blood and quern. At the edge of sleep, Julia whispered to Elisa, so soft that only the earth and God could hear. "We are not lost," she said, "only waiting to be found." Elisa pressed her forehead to Julia's shoulder and wept without sound. They camped at a crossroads that night under a leaning oak that rattled its boughs branches like bone. Arlon built a fire, more for himself than for them, and sprawled in his blanket with a grunt. The sisters huddled together beneath a rough carva, the cold earth stealing their warmth. The fille crackled low. Coyote called in the distance, their howls slipping through the brittle grass like sorrow-made sound. Julia lay awake, her mind spinning tight circle. She counted stars until her vision blurred. She made seal promise to ardir to protect Elisa to find a way. Sleep cam feet feel and thin. At first light they packed again. Arlon barked orders, his patience as thin as his scruple. The road ahead stretched pale and endless. The sisters climbed back into the wagon, their bodies stiff, their spirit raw beat unbroken. A town smudged the horizon mide. A scattering of buildings stitched together be despacion and dust. Beyond it, Julia saw what she assumed was Harlon's lard, a wide, ragged stretch of Paris hemmed in beef fencing. Aouz perched like a bloated spide in the center. Even from a distance, the place felt wrong, too big, too empty. The horse plodded toward it, heads low. Elisa drew a slow breath and let it out, the sound almost like a paye. Julia set her jaw. Whatever waited for them behind those walls, they would face it together. The wagon creaked into the air. No welcome met them, only the slap of the wind against the posh boards. A woman emerged from the shadows of the ooze, tall, gaunt, wearing black so it seemed to leach the color from the air around her. Holon sisté, Mrs. Langlais, her eyes flickered over Julia and Elisa like measuring cloth. Another tad, unspoken. Another jugement passed without tial. Holland's laughter broke the moment. He waved toward the ooze, already bored of his acquisition. "Get them settled, Langlais," he said. "Ego business in town." He didn't wait for her plea. He climbed into a second wagon and rattled off toward the saloon, dust trailing like a sinner's veil. Mrs. Langlais sniffed, turned on her heel, and disappeared inside. The sisters stood alone in the yah, dust swirling around their boots, the sky stretched wide and pitiless above. Elisa glanced at Julia, her lip trembling, and for a moment Julia saw the little girl she used to be, the one who carried Kitten arm in her appaw and cried when the wind broke the corn. Julia reached out and took her arm, squeezing it tight. Together they crossed the threshold into the unknown. The door swung shut behind them with a sound like finality, and the Paris wind saw mournfully through the empty yah. The ooze was a gras thing, once before time and cruelty hollowed it out. Wide verandas sagged under their own weight, shutters hung, crooked or rusted edge, and the smell of hoe coiled beneath the perfume of dying hose that clung stubbornly to the floor garden face. Inside, the rooms were large beat cold, filled with heavy velvet tap and furniture that seemed too large for any living soul. The walls wore faded paper, the pattern of flowers and vine curling away as if trying to escape their own decay. Every floorboard whispered complaint underfoot, and the high ceilings trapped the echoes of lost laughter like ghosts no one dared name. Mrs. Langlais showed them to a room at the top of a narrow staircase. 'Twere beds, 'twere chipped wash basin, a cracked miroir and a gilded frame that had seen better women and better years. "You'll keep to yourself, Mrs." Langlais said, voice as brittle as winter harsh. "You'll be clean, you'll be obédi, you'll be gat feel." Then she turned and left without waiting for her plea, the hem of her black dress slicing the air like a blade. Julia set her satchel down by the bed nearest the window. Dust floated in the thin light like tired Angel. She looked around the room, taking its measure. One door, one window, a lock or the outside of the door. Her heart sank, but she did not show it. Elisa crossed the room in small, calf-feel step, touching the edge of the bed, the cool porcelain of the basin, the worn frame of the window. Each touche seemed to say, "Is this real? Is this all?" Julia busied herself unpacking their few things. It gave her something to do, kept the scream trapped behind her teeth from tearing loose. That night they sat side by side on the bed, staring out the narrow window at a sky smeared with bruised star. Somewhere out there was the rive, the fields, the free wildness they had once known. Here the world had shrunk to four walls and rules spoken in T, contempt du ton. Days blurred into each other like watercolor, left too law in the hair. Mornings began with Mrs. Langley's sharp knock and a tay of blanc porridge. Afternoons were sewing, mending, reading dull books from the Dusty library, or learning how to walk, speak, and smile as if they belonged to Arlon Wexley's hollow world. They wore fine dresses stitched with lace so delicate it snagged or their calloused fange. Their hair was brushed and pinned until their scalp burned. They dusted their face until they were pale ghosts of themselves. Beat beneath the satin and pearls, their spirit coiled tighter each day, waiting for something they could not yet name. Allah came and went like a storm cloud, some team gone for days at a time, some team appearing without warning. When he was puzzed, the ooze became smalé, airless, thick with tar sior. He would summon them to dîner in the Grand Hall, where a chandelier hung like a rotting carcasse over a table set with gleaming sylve and plat that tasted of nothing. He watched them eat, his small eyes glinting in the candle light. His questions were few bit heavy, always circling back to ownership, to possession. "You're getting petit be the day," he said os, wiping grease from his mouth with a silk napkin. "You'll be worth every penny ye paid." Julia lowered her gaze and said nothing. Eliza forced a small, tight smile that ear to see. Afterward, back in their room, they would see in silence, until the numbness wore off, until tears could calm and be swallowed back before they gave themselves away. On the fourth Sunday, the first thread of charge began to weave itself into their lives. In the kitchen, while fetching tea for Mrs. L'Anglais Eliza Mehuti. Her tea was not young anymore, her air shot with gray, her ass tog from years of kneading bread and scrubbing pull. But her eyes were kind, and in this place, kindness was a miracle. She pressed a small wrapped bundle into Eliza's arm. 'Twere fresh biscuits still warm. A wink, a touche to her leap for secrecy, and she was gone, slipping back into the shadows. Eliza brought the bundle back to their room like a sacred offering. Julia smiled for the first time in days, and they ate in greedy silence, savoring the simple gas of it. The next afternoon, Huti found Julia in the hallway, pausing as she dusted a vase no one cared about. "You mind yourself, girl," she said, her voice pitched low. "Men like Wexley, they don't be pretty things unless they ain't to break them." Julia nodded os, the understanding settling heavy in her gui. Weeks stretched on. Spring tried to creep in at the edge of the lawn. But here inside the velvet cage, no seasons changed. Only the sameness of waiting, enduring, breathing kitly enough not to steer the dust of Harlon's moods. One evening, as the sun sagged red and swollen behind the eel, Allah gathered the girls in the parlour. "'Twere guests were expected," he said. "'Twere haché men of means, of ambition. Good men," he insisted, who would make stog alias. "You'll be all your best behavior," he said, his voice thick with warning. "Might be you sham one of them, might be you find a new arm sooner than you think." His gain was a thing to flinch from, not to assuage. After he left, Julia sat by the window, her thoughts running like deer through the tall grass of her mind. Eliza brushed her hair in long, slow strokes, the sound like the whisper of forgotten hiver. "You think it mate how we behave?" Eliza asked at last, voice small and distant. Julia thought of their mother, of how she had tried to be good, to be kind, and how it had not spared her from sickness or sorrow. "No," Julia said, staring out at the endless fields. "But we'll survive." "We have to survive." Eliza nodded, setting down the brush with trembling fingers. The next morning arrived sharp and clear, the sky a brittle blue. Mrs. L'Anglais outfitted them in their finesse dress, corset laced so tight their heb ached, slipper that pinched their toes until tears prickled at the corner of their eyes. They were given gloved, delicate things like spide webs, and told to smile bit not too wide, to speak bit not too much, to exist bit not too op. The ooh dragged. The ooze seemed to hold its breath. When the knock finally came, the sound echoed through every hollow space. Julia and Eliza stood in the parlour, side by side, arms clasped tight behind their backs, hearts hammering like fists against locked doors. The front door swung wide. In stepped 2 men, the dust of the tie still clinging to their coats, their boots heavy with honest earth. Julia's heart stumbled in her chest. The first man was tall and lean, his face carved by sun and wind, a scat running from the corner of his jaw to his throat like a white hive. His eyes were pale and steady like the winter sky before snowfall. Daniel Morgan. The cigar man was broader, with laughing eyes and a crooked smile, a warmth to him that softened the worn leather of his pesas. Sila Morgan. Brothers be the look of them, men of the law, not of this crumbling, suffocating ooze. Mrs. L'Anglais curtsied stiffly. Allah blustered and boomed his welcome. Julia watched the rancher's eyes, saw the way they scanned the room, assessing, understanding more than they let on. When Daniel's gaze met hers, something shifted. Not a spark, not a thunderclap, something qui était deeper, as if a lock turned somewhere in the Eden part of herself. Not rescue, she thought fiercely. Not pity, but meb recognition. Eliza stood frozen beside her, her awe trembling against her skirts. Sila noticed, his smile softening, his posture easing into something open and unthreatening. They were introduced with calm, sweeping words, promise of beauty and virtu let out like wares in a shop window. Julia and Eliza curtsied low as expected. But when they paused, they did not lower their eyes. Daniel inclined his head slightly, the bahest acknowledgement of équal. Silas's grain widened as if he saw through the game and chose to play candidly. The conversation that followed was stilted, Arlon dominating the room with loud boasts and crude laughter. But every so often, Julia caught Danielle watching her with care intensity, as if memorizing her the way a man memorizes the shape of the rive he must one day cross. The sun dipped lower, slanting gold through the cracked window pane. When the brothers paused to leave, Arlon assured them there would be many opportunities to visit, to discuss business and other prospect. Daniel tipped his hat. His gaze lingered a moment longer than custom allowed, and then he was gone, stepping back into the clean, honest air of the open fields. Julia exhaled slowly, her arm unclenching at last. Eliza turned to her, eyes wide and wondering. Hope, fragile and reckless, began to bloom inside them both. The cage had not been broken, not yet. But somewhere out there, someone had heard the rattle of their share. And maybe someone would come back for them. The days after the Hache brothers' visit stretched long and thin, like taffy pulled until nearly snapping. The ooze felt deep now, thrumming with the knowledge that someone from the outside had seen them, had noticed them. A shift so small it might have gone unseen be mossed, but for Julia and Eliza, it was a crack in the walls that held them. Mrs. L'Anglais grew sharper, more watchful. Arlon swaggered through the halls with renewed enjeu in his eyes. Drunk on the idea that his prize might soon be weighed and bought at a eager piece, the girls moved carefully, breathing shallow, speaking little, fearing that any wrong step might close the small door that had begun to open. In the mornings they walked the perimeter of the grounds, skirts whispering against the tigras, watched always be a stable or one of the ranch who owed Arlon too many deb to question orders. But the wind carried story, and it carried up, and some team up finds its own way into caged hearts. It was Haiti, ever seal, ever loyal, who slipped a knot into Julia's apron pocket one afternoon as she passed the kitchen. No words or the paper, only a place and a time, written in a quick and slanted, the old smokeuse after sundown. That evening, after the ooze settled into uneasy sleep, Julia and Eliza slipped through the shadows, bare feet sealed against worn floorboards. The smokeuse sat at the edge of the property, long abandoned, its roof sagging, its walls silvered with ash and weather. Inside, the air was thick with the memory of fear and salted meat. A single lantern burned low on the dirt floor, casting trembling shadows against the walls. Daniel stood by the far wall, arm crossed, hat low over his brow. Sila leaned against the doorway, whittling a sleeve of wood, his knife flashing in the dim light. Julia's heart stuttered off, then steadied itself. Daniel straightened, his eyes catching hers like a lasso, holding steady. "We don't have much time," he said, voice low, rough as Gavel underfoot. Julia nodded, pulling Eliza slightly in front of her, shielding her out of instinct she didn't question. "We heard things," Silas said, tucking his knife away, "about the two of you about Wexley. He did not say the ugly words, and for that Julia was cat feel." Daniel shifted, the leather of his boots creaking. "We want to help." Simple words, no grand promises, no florid speeches, just steady, solid truth. Julia's throat tightened. She was so used to men speaking at her, around her, about her. Neve to her, neve with the kind of care respect Daniel's voice carried. "How?" she whispered, voice splintering in the hush. "We're buying cattle from Wexley," Silas said. "Business keeps his claws. Jeeves is reason to come back." Daniel stepped closer, his gaze neve leaving hers. "We'll find a way to get you out. When it's safe, when you're ready." Eliza clutched Julia's arm, squeezing so tight at ear. Julia squeezed back. Her tea slipped into the smokeuse, then sealed as a car. A bundle under one arm, bread, apple, a flask of water, a small mercy in rough cloth. "I'll convey you attack best he can," Haiti said, eyes glinting in the low light, "but you'll need to be smart. Watch. Wait, Listen." Julia felt something stirred deep inside her chest. Not up, not yet. Something ahde. Hazolve meb, or the stubborn hafizal to let their lives end here in this hollow ooze. Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small batted tin. He handed it to Julia, and when she opened it, she found a thin coil of wire, a tiny flare, a folded scrap of map. "Just in cas," he said. Sila grinned, soft and boyish. "Me brothers a cotu soul, might be the death of us both someday, but it saved more than a few eed." The lantern sputtered, a reminder that time shocked. Daniel touched the beam of his hat, a gesture full of old-fashioned respect. "We'll be back, be ready." Julia watched him go, the night swallowing his tall form, the door swinging shut with a whisper. Eliza turned to her, fast pale eyes lumineux. "Do you think they mean it?" Julia held the terres claws to her chest, feeling its weight, its pomise. "I think," she said slowly. "They might be the first ones who ever did." The following days were carved from glass, sharp and delicate. Every mouvement, every gloss, every breath had to be measured. Alors grew restless, sensing something he could not name. He spent more time at the saloon, drinking and bragging, but his shadow lingered over the ooze like a thundercloud. Julia and Elisa practiced patience. They memorized the creaks of the flaws, the moods of the gouaille, the pattern of misses, Langley's endless inspection. They learned the ooze the way a pisonné learns a cage, not with despair, but with cold précision. And still, Danielle and Scylla returned, always under some business patas, always fille. Some team they would catch a few stolen words in the stable, under the covey of tending os. Some team it was a knot slipped between the page of a book left on a parloir table. Always pomies wrapped in caution, in daring. One evening, while Julia brushed Eliza's air by the window, they spotted mouvement near the farce line. 12 figures silhouetted against the dying light, tipping their hats in salute before riding off into the deepening dusk. Julia smiled into Eliza's réflexion. "Aha, and pursue thing. They haven't forgotten," she said. Eliza smiled back, tentative but real. Then came the day when Arlon announced a grand gathering, a celebration of new partnerships. He called it our opportunity to show off his acquisition, his wealth, his dominion. It would be their chance. Petit confirmed it that night, slipping into their room with news carried in whispered urgency. "The brothers are ready," she said. "They'll be waiting by the rive past the old meal. When the clock strikes 11, you sleep out. Qui est Julia's chest tightened around a breath she didn't realize she held. "Are you sure?" she asked. Ruthie's smile was sad and proud all at once. "Girl, I've been sure since the day I first saw you walk into this ooze with your chin held high. You're not meant for cash." The night of the party dawned hot and thick, the air heavy with the smell of dust and sweat and cheap perfume. Arlon paraded them like toffee, introducing them to men with gold teeth and greedy eyes. Julia kept her fast son, her eyes distant. Elisa clung to her side, a porcelain doll with a saccafia Eden beneath her pale cheeks. When the clock in the hallway began its slow, sonohu toll toward 11, Julia nudged Elisa gently. They slipped away under the patas of fetching more wine, hearts hammering loud enough to rattle the teeth in their heads, through the kitchen, through the side door, and to the blessed, forgiving dark. The grass was wet with evening dew, soaking the hem of their dress. The world outside the ooze felt wild and alive, the night full of sounds, cricket, owls, the far-off call of a coyote. They haw, breathless, laughing a little through the terror, skirts hiked up to their knees, bare feet, finding the path be memory and paye. The old meal loomed ahead, a hulking shadow against the silvered sky. And there, waiting by the rive, stood Danielle and Scylla, their ox tethered nearby, their fast gleam and shining with determination. Julia stumbled to a stop, chest heaving. Danielle stepped forward, his arm outstretched, not commanding, not demanding, offering. She took it without hesitation. Scylla helped Elisa onto the ox behind him, steadying her gently, speaking soft words Julia couldn't hear. No one said much. There was no need. The rive glinted like a sword under the moonlight as they crossed it. The cold water rising to their knees, pulling at their clothes, urging them onward. Behind them, distant and growing fainte, the ooze sagged into shadow, a place they no longer belonged to. Ahead lay the unknown. Rough roads, days, danger still. But Julia felt a wild, fierce beneath in her chest. Not a fairy tale, not a heskia beginning. They hawed into the night, dust and stars swirling around them, the future unwritten and waiting, wide as the Paris sky. The star burned cold above them, scattered like broken glass across a velvet sky. The night smelled of rive water and wild grass and the deep coppery tog of fear. Every hoofbeat was a paye, every breath a rebellion against the life they had been forced to endure. The rive at their backs whispered farewell as they galloped farther into the waiting dark. Julia clung to Daniel's waist, feeling the steady heave and fall of his breath, the unspoken promise stitched into every fil mouvement. Elisa hawed with Scylla, Aham wrapped tight around his middle, her face buried in the folds of his worn jacket. She trembled still from cold or fear or both, but she did not ask to stop. She did not look back. Ahead the lawn stretched endless and unknowable, a kilt of Paris and scrub, and the occasional gnarled oak reaching claw-like toward the heavens. They hawed until the horse foamed and panted, until Julia's leg ached, and her arm stiffened with a chill, until even the stars seemed to blur into the blackness. Danielle finally pulled up near a stud of trees, sheltered from the open plain. A small fille was coaxed to life with practiced awe, no brighter than a staff fallen to earth. "We'll hest here," Danielle said, voice low, "car feel not to disturb the fragile safety of the moment." Sila helped Eliza down, murmuring encouragement, his big awe surprise, glee gentle as he steadied her shaking lab. Julia slid to the ground, stumbling slightly before Danielle caught her elbow, a touche light as a feather, bits tall enough to hold her steady. "Thank you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could weigh them. He only nodded, his face unreadable in the flickering Fiat light. Ruthie's bundle had survived the journée, though the bread was crushed and the apple bruised. They had in silence gat feel for the sustenance, for the simple fact of still breathing. The Fille crackled softly, a heartbeat against the vast hush of the Paris. Julia sat close to Eliza, wrapping her ciste in her shawl, feeling the slot de bon under the soft fabrique, the fragility that lived side by side with the fier spirit inside her. "You did good," Julia said, brushing a star of air from Eliza's face. "You were brave." Eliza managed a small, crooked smile. He was terrified. "Bravery is not about not being scared," Sila said from across the Fille, tossing a twig into the flamme. "It's about going anyway." Julia glanced at Danielle, who watched her with that same steady gaze, as if trying to memorize her for all the days to come. Sleep cam in feet-feel pocket. Julia dozed, leaning against a tree trunk, waking often to the sounds of restless oss, the whistle of wind through the grass, the soft murmur of Sila and Danielle keeping watch. The dream came like smoke, the old ooze, her mother's voice calling from somewhere just out of reach, the sharp crack of a door slamming shut. She woke with a gasp, heart pounding, the Fille burned low to coals. Danielle was there, sitting a few feet away, whittling a piece of wood into a small, shapeless thing. He did not look at her, did not unto depart the trembling she could not eat. Instead, he spoke into the space between them, his voice soft as the river's sigh. "You're safe now." Julia closed her eyes against the sudden sting. She wanted to believe him more than anything. The horizon began to bleed with the first pale streaks of dawn, brushing the world in ash and pearl. They saddled up again, moving before the world fully woke. Danielle led them across Gilly and Hege, weaving a path no casual pursuer could easily follow. Julia marveled at the way he seemed to know the laud be hot, reading the hawk and gas like a map written in old Saketog. By noon they reached a low hedge overlooking a stretch of Skibla, broken by a line of cottonwoods and a narrow creek. "This way," Danielle said, urging his horse down the slope. They followed single feel, the ground soft and treacherous beneath their mounts. At the creek, they let the horse drink, refilled canteens, and splashed water over their dusty face. Eliza knelt by the bank, staring at her réflexion in the trembling surface. "I don't even recognize myself," she said, her voice breaking like thin ice. "You're not who you were," Julia said gently, crouching beside her. "Neither am I." Eliza turned to her, tears shining in her lash. "Is that good or bad?" Julia thought of the girl she had been obédi qui afraid to want more than survival. She thought of the woman she could become, standing on her own feet, speaking her own truths. "Meb it's just two," she said, "and meb that's enough for now." A branch cracked sharply in the woods behind them. Sila spun around on his pistol. Danielle Hawes' eyes narrowing. Out of the trees hard twa men, dust-streaked and gleam, guns visible at their eep. Wexley's men. Julia felt the blood tear from her face. They had been found. Danielle stepped forward, planting himself between the girls and the threat. "We don't want trouble," he called. "Turn around and go." One of the men spat into the dirt. "Ain't you a call, Fayad? Those girls belong to Ahlon Wexley." "Belong to nobody," Danielle said, voice hardening. Sila flanked Danielle, his pistol loose and ready at his side. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then a miracle, the sound of more horse, more men. From the hedge above Cam Shahif Lawson and Tour de Petit, Heifel slung across their saddles. The men cursed and bolted, disappearing into the trees like smoke. Lawson trotted down the slope, nodding at Danielle. "Go your message," he said. "Signed affidavit, witness statement, Holland's go no legal claim anymore." Her lief collapsed Julia's knees, and she sat heavily on a hawk, burying her face in her arm. It was over, or as over as it could be. Lawson tipped his hat. "You best get them somewhere safe. Wexley won't give up easy." Danielle nodded gently. "We know they hard again, moving faster now, the wind in their face sharp and clean." The laud opened up before them. Golden fields rolling under a wide, forgiving sky. By sundown they reached the Morgan ranch, a modest ooze of weathered wood and sturdy stone, a bahana corral, a vegetable patch sprouting have green shoots. It wasn't gone. It wasn't heesh. It was free. Julia slid off the horse and stood staring at it, the lump in her throat too big to swallow. Daniel came up beside her, not touching, just standing near enough for her to feel his warmth. "It's not much," he said kitly. "But it's ours, and you're welcome to make it your too, if you want." Juliette turned to him, saw the truth in his face, the patient waiting up. Not a demand, not a clair or invitation. Elisa laughed, a sound bright and startling as Scylla showed her the small garden, the goats bleating in their pen. For the first time in what felt like forever, Julia let herself smile. They were safe. They were free. They had survived the night the star wept, and now under this vast, forgiving sky they would learn how to live again. The road ahead would not be easy. Healing Neve was, but for the first time the road belonged to them. They would walk it, stumble it, support it, side by side with the men who had seen them not as broken things to possess, but as whole soul worth standing with. Night fell slow and soft, wrapping the ranch in cool am. From the porch, Julia watched the last light fade. Daniel's dog snoring softly by her feet, Eliza's laughter drifting from the kitchen. Danielle joined her, leaning against the post. Neither spoke. Words weren't always needed. The star blinked awake overhead, scattered and brave. Julia tilted her face up to them, feeling the cool breath of the universe against her skin. "We are not what they tried to make us," she whispered. Daniel's arm brushed her feather light steady. "No," he said, "you're something far greater." She believed him, and for the first time she believed herself too. The star wept again that night, but this time it was with joy. The days that followed fell into a rhythm both forehand and comforting, a melody the girls had never dared imagine for themselves. The ranch woke early with the rooster's call, the smell of wood smoke and baking bread curling through the air like a soft ah coaxing them from sleep. Juliette took to the work naturally, her strong and willing. She mended foss, gathered egg, learned the Stubahan ways of the meal Danielle favored for plowing. Each small victory stitched a new piece of herself into being. The rough place inside her smoothing with every honest day's labor. Elisa thrived among the gens les cornets of the ranch, tending the garden, reading aloud from battered books or the porch, singing soft song that floated or the breeze like wild flowers scattered beyond unseen awe. Her laughter, once buried deep beneath fear, came easier now, surprising her as much as anyone. Danielle and Scylla never crowded them, never claimed them. They worked alongside, shoulder to shoulder, offering guidance where needed, but trusting the girls to find their own ways, their own strength. It was Daniel's steadiness that Julia felt most acutely. He was not a man of many words, but the ones he offered were sere and weighty, falling between them like stone building a bridge. When Julia faltered, assured if she could ever fully shed the scare of the girl who had been sold like cattle, Danielle would simply nod at her and say, "One step at a time, Julia. You're already walking farther than you know." And so she did. One evening, as the sun melted into a sky strewn with golden lavande, Julia found herself standing in the field beyond the barn, Alte in her awe, and a Stubahan wide-eyed colt staring back at her. She had spent 3 days trying to gentle him, trying to earn his trust, and he had met every advance with suspicion and flight. Danielle leaned against the fosse nearby, watching but not interfering. Julia moved slow, speaking in the soft, coaxing tone Haiti had also used to calm the skittish Kichenka. Inch by inch she approached, her awe open, her heart steady. The colt snorted, tossing his head. But when she did not retreat, he stepped forward, weary but willing. Her fange brushed his nose, warm and trembling. "You're safe now," she whispered, not just to him, but to herself. Daniel's voice drifted across the field, low and proud. "Knew you had it in you," Julia turned. The colt's alte looped easily around her wrist, and she smiled at Danielle, a smile full of new beginnings. As the days warmed into the heart of Sumet, the ranch buzzed with preparation for the Harvest Festival in town, a gathering that promised musique, trading, and the simple joy of community. It was Scylla who first suggested they go. "You girls have earned a night of dancing and pee," he said, winking at Elisa, who flushed and laughed in a way that made Scylla look like he had just been handed the world. Julia hesitated, old instinct warning her against too much attention, too much op. But Danielle met her gaze across the dîner table, sealed encouragement in the tilt of his head, the slow curl of his arm around his coffee cup. Maybe it was time. The night of the festival, the town square bloomed with lanterns strung between buildings, their light painting the dusty streets in pools of amber and haws. Fiddles sang, boots stomped, and laughter filled the air like hair after a long drought. Julia wore a dress Haiti had once helped her sew, simple blue-ass twilight with a riband at the waist. Eliza in soft green looked like something out of a dream, her hair braided with small wild flowers Sila had gathered along the creek. Daniel offered his arm to Julia without a word, and she took it, her arm settling into the crook of his elbow like it had always belonged there. They danced slowly at first, Julia stiff with nerve, Daniel patient and solide, letting her find the rhythm or her own. "You're doing fine," he murmured, his breath warm against her air. Around them the world blurred into light and sound, the sharp edge softened by joy. Eliza laughed as Sila spun her too fast, nearly tipping her into the cobblestone street and even misses. Tionne from the mercantile clapped a log, her usually stern face creased with smiles. For one night there was no past heavy or their shoulder, no fear lurking in the cornet of their minds. There was only the dance, the staff overhead, the musique in their blood. Latte, after the last note faded and the last lanterne sputtered out, Daniel led Julia to the edge of the square where the Paris breathed against the darkness. They stood side by side, watching the distant fields heap under the rising moon. "I never thought I'd have this," Julia said kitly, her voice raw with wonder. A life." Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He fumbled it open, revealing a thin bard of Sylvain, Plain, and Botifil, shaped by a craftsman who understood that strength lay in simplicity. He didn't kneel, didn't make a grand speech. He simply held it out, his arm steady. "Not because you owe me anything," he said, his voice rough. "Not because he saved you, just because I'd be proud to walk beside you for the rest of me days, if you'll have me." Julia felt her heart, so long locked behind walls of fear and survival, shatter and rebuild itself in a single breath. She took the ring, her finger brushing his, and slid it onto her own arm without hesitation. "Be proud, too," she said, smiling through tears that tasted like freedom. Sila proposed to Eliza 3 days later with a crooked daisy chain, and a promise to never let a day pass without making her laugh. She accepted between peals of laughter and the happiest tears Julia had ever seen. The weddings were simple affaires, held in the meadow behind the ranch, désert and corn flowers braided en toga galant, Huiti standing poodly beside them with a odd kerchief pressed to her nose. Shahif Lawson officiated, his usual sternness softened by the genuine affection he felt for the fou of them, survivor and temeur alike. Danielle and Julia exchanged vows under the wide, forgiving sky, the golden field swaying around them like an ocean of possibility. There were no fancy words, no grand déclaration, just promises spoken plein and to start together, to build something better, to heal at their own pass. The rings slid into place like they had been waiting for this moment all their lives. Afterward, there was dancing in the band, the old floorboards trembling under the stomping of boots and the swirl of skirts. Eliza's laughter bright and clear, a musique more pursued than any fiddle tune. Sila beamed at her like a man who had caught a falling star and dared to hold it gently in his arm. And Daniel, ever steady, ever held Julia close as they swayed to the slow song, his chair resting against her temple, their hearts beating a clear, steady rhythm of belonging. Latte, as the festivity died down and the lanterne winked out one by one, Daniel led Julia to the porch where the night stretched wide and welcoming before them. They sat together in the old rocking chair, her leg tucked beneath her, his arm draped around her shoulder. For a long time they said nothing, content to listen to the night sounds, the chirp of cricket, the low murmure of the creek, the occasional soft whinny of a horse in the corral. Finally, Juliette turned her face up to the star, bright and endless above them. "Do you think it's possible?" she asked softly, "to be broken and whole at the same time?" Daniel considered this, his thumb tracing slow circles against her arm. "I think he said that being broken just means you've lived and being whole means you kept going anyway." She smiled, a slow, blossoming thing that filled her chest with warmth. "Then we're doing just fine," she said. He kissed her ear, a whisper of a promise. There would be hardships, droughts, debt, and the honest labor of starting from scratch when tomorrow arrived. However, they had all they required tonight. Love, unwavering and fierce, unyielding and radiant. A future carved out of gold fields beneath the sky of tomorrow. Juliette closed her eyes and allowed the wind to carry her into the life she had chosen and fought for. She also claimed to have heard the stars singing, no longer crying beats celebrating at.